So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions played their first game of preseason a week or so ago. The Detroit Lions played a very, very tough game versus a very good New York Giants opponent, and of course had quite a few players come out as big winners from this contest. And today, I just wanted to go over all the big winners of week one, go over the players that really stood out, go over the players that jumped up the depth chart, and go over the players that just had the best games, had the best showings, and made the biggest impacts in week one, leading to probably and likely a bigger opportunity in week two of the preseason that comes up in just a couple of days. So starting off, I want to take a look at a position group in its entirety because the Lions defensive line was phenomenal. Romeo Okwara was tied for first in the NFL last week with 6 total pressures on the quarterback, followed closely behind with Julian Okwara, who was tied for third with 5 pressures, alongside James Houston, who was tied as well for third with 5 pressures against the quarterback. And of course, Julian Okwara had 3 sacks. Romeo Okwara had 1 sack. And although James Houston didn't quite get a sack, he was, I would argue, even more impactful than Romeo Okwara, who ended up having more pressures as he did force at least 1 incompletion and was a big factor on the Detroit Lions edge rush. Now, there were a lot of people that were saying that the Detroit Lions were, basically playing their starters to get preseason wins and all of this stuff. But in reality, the Detroit Lions didn't play their starting edge rushers, right? They didn't play Aiden Hutchinson. They didn't play Charles Harris. They didn't play some of the other guys that are more secured on this roster, and they didn't even play James Houston as much as I thought that they were going to. Romeo Okwara and Julian Okwara are genuinely 2 of the players that I think are on the roster spot. Josh Pascal has a spot. Aiden Hutchinson has a spot. James Houston or Charles Harris has a spot. Even I would argue James Houston has a spot on this team, leaving Romeo and Julian Okwara, the 2 brothers, essentially left to fight it out for that 5th and 6th spot, assuming they don't keep all 6 edge rushers around. And they all played really, really well. Of course, leading the NFL, and the Detroit Lions as a team leading the NFL in pressures through 1 week of the preseason. Now, the edge rushers were not the only players to have good games, as the interior of the defensive line also played very, very well. Levi Onwuzurike finished the game with 3 tackles as well as a tackle for loss. He had multiple pass rush wins and was a really big factor on a couple really tight throws and was able to throw the quarterback off a little bit because he was winning and getting around the defensive line very, very quickly. Now, Benito Jones was a player that actually ended up getting a TFL as well as a sack with the starters of week 1 of the preseason. He's a player that was kind of a quiet behind-the-scenes pass rusher last year, but ended up being fairly impactful down the stretch and ended up being a very good player for the Detroit Lions, all things considered. And then, of course, 3rd-round pick Broderick Martin did have that 4th down stop pairing up with Jack Campbell, a gotta-have-it rush for the New York Giants, a rushing attack that had, for the most part, that drive been playing really, really well. And Broderick Martin was able to disengage with 2nd-round pick John Michael Schmitz, was able to make a tackle for loss and actually hold him up so that Jack Campbell could also get on the tackle and make a huge stop on 4th down to get the ball back to the Detroit Lions and swing the momentum back in favor of Detroit. Now, the defensive line was not the only group that really impressed, but the next group I want to talk about is going to be the undrafted defensive back. Now, there are 3 DBs that went undrafted this year that were picked up by the Detroit Lions, that being Starling Thomas IV, Stephen Gilmore, as well as Brandon Joseph. Now, the defensive backs, the undrafted free agent DBs, also played really, really well. Starling Thomas was a player that actually started the game for the Detroit Lions, ended up giving up 0 catches on 2 targets for 1 pass defended, and actually was able to make a tackle for loss on a screen pass. So technically, he even gave up negative yardage if you want to count that completed screen against him. Starling Thomas was phenomenal, showed his deep speed when matched up with Jalen Hyde, a player that was selected in the 3rd round by the New York Jets, and a player that technically is a better football player than him based off their prospect rankings. Starling Thomas went toe-to-toe with him, showed off his elite speed, showed off his elite coverage ability, and showed off the ability to cover even some of the fastest players in the NFL. Stephen Gilmore, the undrafted free agent from Marshall, also played quite a significant role in the Detroit Lions secondary. However, didn't play quite as much as Starling Thomas. Didn't quite play in the first quarter, ended up playing about the second half of the second quarter and the entirety of the third quarter before being taken out towards the end of the game. Now, I only saw Stephen Gilmore get targeted 1 time, and that did not result in a catch. The ball wasn't a great throw, but Starling Thomas also didn't give up anything, wasn't beat on the play, and would have been in a great position to make the play had the ball been catchable for the wide receiver. Both of these players have had great camps. Both of these players have gone up against starters on the Detroit Lions offense and gone toe-to-toe with some of the best players the Lions have to offer. And even though they've been beat a couple times in camp, they've always been able to hit back, and they've always been able to hold their own, even versus guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, even versus guys like Jameson Williams. These two have been going back and forth with the starting receivers at camp and have been able to hold their own. And of course, you have Brandon Joseph, the undrafted free agent safety from the University of Notre Dame, the turnover machine, and the ball hawking free safety for the Fighting Irish. Allowed 0 catches through the air, of course, had a pass defended and a game-stealing interception at the end. We didn't really get to see the range of Brandon Joseph too much. We didn't really get to see the elite ball hawking ability, as there wasn't too many contested plays deep down the field, too many shots down the field from the New York Giants. But on the one shot they did take on the last desperation heave of the game, Brandon Joseph was able to get in the position, pick the ball off, and of course get down to seal the game for the Detroit Lions. I think all 3 of these defensive backs played very, very well, and I think all 3 of them will not only be competing for practice squad positions, but I think all 3 of them will be competing for regular season action, as all 3 of them have showed the ability to play in the NFL, have all showed the ability to make plays in the NFL, and of course, all had a really, really good week 1 for Detroit. Now, taking a look at Chase Cota. Chase Cota has kind of been the forgotten wide receiver this year, right? Chase Cota has been a player that isn't talked about very much because there's other big storylines, right? You have Amon-Ra St. Brown dominating camp. You have Jameson Williams, the first-round pick going into year 2. You have Khalif Raymond, who just got an extension. You have Josh Reynolds coming back from injury. You have Marvin Jones returning to Detroit. You have Dylan Drummond being the standout in camp, the undrafted camp invite UDFA that's starting to stand out and play really, really well. And Chase Cota has kind of fallen into the background and not been talked about as much as some of the other Lions wide receivers, and yet he's somehow found a way to be the biggest impact player on the night on the Detroit Lions offense and be their go-to weapon and #1 contributor for the passing game in week 1. Chase Cota has been an afterthought. He's been thought as a preseason cut. He's been thought as a guy that just wasn't going to make the roster, and if he was going to be the last guy on the practice squad. And yet he came out and was the best wide receiver of the preseason so far. 7 targets, 4 catches, 60 yards, averaging 15 yards per catch. Showed some yak ability, showed some ability to box out defenders, showed strong at the catch point, was able to catch through contact, and was just really, really solid and was the quarterback's best friend for every single drive that he was in there. And every single drive, every target that he got, obviously dropped the first one off a little bit of offensive PI, pushed off a little bit, jumped a little bit too early, but he came back and made play after play after play, and he was a really, really impressive wide receiver, leading the team in receptions as well as yards, not quite being able to find the end zone, but still showing really good ability, potentially as that jump ball wide receiver that as of right now, the Lions don't really have, right? They have Marvin Jones, they have Josh Reynolds, but those guys aren't going to go up and box out players like Chase Cota showed the ability to do this preseason. Now, the next offensive player I want to talk about is the second leading receiver for the Lions, that being second-year tight end James Mitchell. James Mitchell was targeted 3 times yesterday, was targeted 3 times, in the game versus the Giants, had 3 receptions for 53 yards, a long of 32, as well as averaging 17.7 yards per reception. Now, at least 2 of his catches were bootleg rollouts where he was able to get the ball right around the line of scrimmage and use his yak ability to get up the field, had some good blocking by Jameson Williams and Chase Cota and Dylan Drummond, and was able to work his way down the field, pick up massive gains from yak position. And I think a lot of people forget about James Mitchell. They forget that he was a 5th-round pick. They forget that he was a massive playmaker at the University of Virginia Tech, and he just wasn't really able to do as much as he could have last year, right? He was injured starting the season, didn't have great chemistry with Jared Goff, but showed his yak ability. Him and Sam Laporta can be a really good receiving duo, and then, of course, you have Brock Wright as kind of the blocking tight end, the balanced tight end. That trio, despite not having any massive names, could be one of the most efficient receiving tight end trios in the NFL this year because James Mitchell has that ability for the big play. He has the top end speed of a tight end, and he has the ability to run after the catch, just like Sam Laporta. And the 2 of them on the field at the same time, I think, are going to be a really dynamic duo and a hard duo to defend. Now, the last player I wanted to talk about today is a player that I kind of unintentionally talked poorly about last episode, and that is going to be Connor Galvin, the undrafted 6'7" offensive tackle from the University of Baylor. Last week played left tackle for the Detroit Lions, and Adrian Martinez didn't get a chance to play until the 4th quarter, and I had said that the offensive line really didn't play well. And while that is true, I only said Corby Solsdale played a very good game, and I was talked about in the comments, and there was somebody that said, hey, check out Connor Galvin. Go back, take a look at it, focus on him, and see what you think, because I thought he played a very good game. And honestly, I think I was wrong. Connor Galvin was the 3rd highest rated player on the Detroit Lions offense with a 72.3 PFF grade, allowing 1 quarterback hit, that being the scramble drill in the red zone in which Martinez took off up the middle. He was hit by the guy Connor Galvin was blocking, but was able to pick up a 1st down, and Connor Galvin did do a good job early in the pass pro. He just wasn't quite able to keep up when, Adrian Martinez ran in front of him. Hard to block for sure, but that was the 1 quarterback hit he allowed. He was strong in pass pro. He was strong in the run game. He got to the 2nd level, seemed very, very calm in pass protection and very good at just shutting down edge rushers. And overall, Connor Galvin was just a really, really good offensive tackle. And I think him and Colby Sorsdale are 2 players that stood out on the offensive line, despite the entirety of the offensive line as a group not necessarily playing its strongest football. So with all that being said, those are my big winners from week 1 of the preseason. The defensive line, the UDFA DBs, as well as Chase Cota, James Mitchell, and Connor Galvin all played really good games. I think they'll all get a little bit more time next week, and hopefully we will see a lot more of them versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, continuing to improve, continuing to get better, and continuing to show exactly why they are fighting for a roster spot and potentially have the option to make the final 53. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below who your biggest winner was from week 1 of the NFL preseason. Did I hit anybody that you wanted to talk about, or did I miss a player that you thought behind the scenes had a very good game as well? I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today.